It doesn't matter how you've started the season, you can always turn your season around or continue to dominate, but you need to be making those right decisions. Today I have 8 players that you should start or sit for week 3 in fantasy football. If you enjoy, consider supporting down below. Kicking off here with accountability. Of course, on your screen, we have last week's recap. I would say we went 6-2. So that seems to be the trend. Every single week so far, 6-2. So again, 75% of the picks today will be correct. Let's kick it off here with 2 defenses. I usually only do 1, but today I just like these matchups so much in week number 3. I got to bring them to you guys. For the first one, Seattle, you're home against Miami. If Tua is playing, it's a questionable start, but I still like the play because it's a great defense. You're led by a great defensive mind in Mike McDaniel. You're at home with the 12th man behind you. And if Tua is not active, which I don't think he will be, you're playing against Skylar Thompson in his first career start this season. You have been a top 10 defense for fantasy so far this year, giving you 8 fantasy points a game, which doesn't sound like a lot. But as we know, 8 to 10 fantasy points is pretty solid for a defense on any given week for fantasy. The only con I will say this week for Seattle is that you're playing an offense that just has so much speed in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and all their running backs that you can't really game plan for them. You can't really stop all of them on a weekly basis. But if you can, elite defensive play, again, you're at home, I'm going to say start Seattle's defense. Another defense I love, it might be the best defensive player of the week, is the Las Vegas Raiders. They are home against the Carolina Panthers, who are the worst team in football. Let's just keep it frank. But for the Raiders, this is the best matchup for defenses so far this year, even for all of last season. So Carolina, they just lack a lot of great talent on that side of the ball. And even if they have the talent in your eyes, they just haven't had the quarterback to other people. Bryce Young is now benched. Andy Dalton is coming in at 39 years old or whatever he is, and he's a statue. I think this is a Raiders team that has a great defensive front. They can apply a lot of pressure, get after the passer, give us a lot of sacks and mistakes for fantasy football, which we like to see. And I just think this is a Raiders team that is 1-1. You kind of don't know what you are at this point. You need a statement victory. So again, with the home crowd behind you, you need to get after Andy Dalton, make him uncomfortable, and I think you should blow out the Carolina Panthers this week. So with that train of thought, I'm going to say start the Raiders as well. Love these 2 defenses this week. We'll make this one quick, and this will be my one gimme of the week. But the reason I have him on today's video is because he wasn't drafted for most fantasy players to be your starter, right? You draft him as a backup to see what you had in the rookie. Of course, maybe the greatest tight end prospect we've ever seen in Brock Bowers. But I have to raise the question to you guys. Is he so far the best draft day steal? Because he was going in the 8th, 9th, 10th round, and he has been the tight end 2 so far this season. 15.5 fantasy points a game. He has the best matchup ahead of him against the Carolina Panthers, who are giving up 12.5 fantasy points a game to tight ends. And Brock Bowers, I mean, you can't really say much wrong about him. That's why there's no cons for him this week. 8.5 targets a game, 7.5 receptions, 75 yards a game. And hey, guess what? He's due for his first career touchdown. I think he gets it at home against the Panthers this week. We're going to start Brock Bowers. Now again, Derek Carr, maybe the MVP of the league so far 2 weeks in. He's the quarterback 2 so far in that stretch. 22 fantasy points a game, the number 1 offense in football. Dating back to last year, they've scored 40-plus points in 3 straight games. The greatest show on turf has somehow been revived, but now it's in New Orleans with this Clint Kubiak offense. And they're playing a Philadelphia team that has been a bottom 5 defense against the pass, dating back all the way to middle of last year. This new offense is electric. You want pretty much any piece of it if it continues to go on this trend. But the only cons I could say is that on paper, the Philadelphia defense has a lot of talent. But outside of that, it should be a high-scoring shootout here in New Orleans. Again, he's also home. I like Derek Carr this week. Let's get into a not-so-positive outlook here going into week number 3. and that's J.K. Dobbins. I have been behind this bandwagon all off season, and last week I told you guys to start him. He was the running back one last week, or running back two, excuse me. But for J.K. Dobbins, on the year, the running back four, 21 and a half fantasy points a game, and this scheme is pretty clear. We're going to run the football till you make us stop running the football. And in week one, it was pretty much of a split workload between Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. Last week, it's pretty cut and dry. I think it was a more of a 70-30 in favor of J.K. Dobbins. So Dobbins, coming off of this big knee injury, or Achilles injury, excuse me, seems to be one of the first ever running backs that it doesn't need much time to ramp up. He's just dominant from day number one, which I'm happy to see, even though he was a Raven. The cons, I would say, though, and this is the reason why we're going to sit J.K. Dobbins after his a fiery start this year. Pittsburgh is the third best defense against the run, dating back to middle of last year, but especially this season. They're only allowing 75 total yards a game to the position in the receiving and the rushing game. This is a guy that I think is going to be a touchdown-dependent play this week because I think it's going to be a split workload. And I think if the Steelers come to play, which they have already this season, I can't imagine outside of like a big breakout play from J.K. Dobbins, which he has the potential to do. Outside of a home run play, I can't see a crazy week coming from J.K. Dobbins. There's other running backs I love, which we'll talk about in a moment. But we're going to sit J.K. Dobbins. It's going to hurt. It's not going to feel right. You're going to hate that decision that you make it. But I think it'll play out in the end. One of those running backs I'm talking about is a guy in Tony Pollard, a guy that has been sitting on every bench that I have him in because it's just, I'm scared to play him. And I don't know what it is, but maybe it's just the offense in general. But one of the, I guess, bright spots of this offense has been Mr. Pollard. He's a top 12 running back this year, 17 fantasy points a game, and he's been the only consistent piece throughout weeks 1 and 2. He seems to be the guy they're trying to get the football as much as they possibly can. But Green Bay is his matchup this week. Tennessee is home. So again, you see a trend here. I like players at home. And, week 1, Saquon had 3 touchdowns and absolutely killed the Green Bay Packers. Week 2, Jonathan Taylor, despite a losing effort, dominated the Green Bay defense. I think Tony Pollard, though he's not on the talent level of those two guys, has the potential, whether if it's in the receiving or the rushing game, in a must-win game for Tennessee, to have a big day. So I like that. The only thing I will say, though, is if this offense continues at this trend, you might get, there's minimal scoring opportunities for this offense because of how much everyone is adjusting to the new scheme and how much Will Levis has struggled. But again, I think it's a must-win for Tennessee. I'm going to say we're going to start Tony Pollard. For Jalen Waddle, look, he has game-breaking ability. You cannot game plan for a guy like Jalen Waddle and or Tyreek Hill. They happen to be on the same team. We know this, right? Now, this is a guy that is a focal point of his offense. He does have a great, scheme around him and head coach in Mike McDaniel that can scheme him to get the ball. Again, this is a guy that without Tua Tagovailoa has averaged just about 11 to 11 and a half fantasy points a game, and that's about 9 or 10 game sample size. The cons, however, if Tua is not there, I'm sitting Jalen Waddle, right? Now, if Tua's there, of course, it makes it a little bit of a more confident play, but this is a team that might not have their starting quarterback. They're on the road against a tough secondary, again, in one of the best home field advantages in the game of football. As I've mentioned at the start of the show, I think Seattle's going to have a big win and a big statement win against Miami this week, especially if Skylar Thompson is the quarterback. We're going to sit Jalen Waddle, and let's get into an interesting one. This one might turn some heads, but T. Higgins, this is a guy that in his career has been a top 12 guy when healthy for a large sample size, whether if it's Joe Burrow as his quarterback or last year when Joe Burrow was out, T. Higgins was still an elite option to play. T. Higgins in this offense. This is an offense that needs to be aggressive this week. I think it's a must-win for Cincinnati, and Washington, I guess as fate would have it, is the best possible matchup for the wide receiver position, and T. Higgins is going to be making his return in week number 3, at least as of right now. I'm recording this on Tuesday morning, ladies and gentlemen. But the cons, again, it's his first game back. Will there be a snap count? I would say yes if Cincinnati was 1-1 or 2-0. But this is a must-win game for Cincinnati. They can't, afford another loss on their schedule, at least this early in the season. So T. Higgins, I think he's going to come back to a full workload, excuse me, and I think he's going to have a pretty solid day. I think the attention will be on Jamar Chase. T. Higgins might slip into the end zone once or twice, and that's going to do it here for today's video. A little bit more lopsided. I like to go 4-4 as far as start and sit players I give you guys, but there's just so many matchups I love this week. So here it is. Seattle and Vegas were starting their defenses. Bowers, Carr, Pollard, and T. Higgins, guys that are on the brink, but if you need to start them, I think they're great options. J.K. Dobbins, Jalen Waddle, two guys that have been great for us, whether in previous years or this season, but we're going to err on the side of the analytics this week, and we're going to sit those guys. But that's going to do it here for today's video. If you enjoyed, of course, drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn those post notifications on. And to close out the show, I should have mentioned this at the top of it. If you have any questions about your lineup this week, or you just want a second opinion, I'm here for you. And I can provide you with that as quickly as I possibly can in the comments section down below. But that's it. I'll see you guys next week.